What if I told you that a small West African country, once dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated, was secretly building one of the most advanced, self-reliant military industries on the continent? What if I told you that while global powers played chess with African lives and resources, this nation quietly flipped the board, changed the rules, and walked away from the table entirely? That nation is Burkina Faso. And the man leading this bold transformation is Captain Ibrahim Traore, not a leader molded by colonial institutions, not a politician trained to please foreign donors, but a son of the soil.
Have you ever wondered why the powerful nations of the world, with all their military might and global reach, sometimes lie awake at night worrying about a small landlocked country in West Africa? It's not because Burkina Faso has nuclear weapons. It's not because it commands vast armies capable of storming across borders. No, it's something far simpler and far more threatening to the established order. It's because Burkina Faso is trying to do the unthinkable, stand on its own 2 feet. For decades, Burkina Faso was little more than a cautionary tale in dusty UN reports, a place journalists described with phrases like one of the world's poorest countries or a hotbed of insecurity. Nearly 40% of its people lived below the poverty line. Its roads cracked under heavy rains, schools often had no lights, and hospitals routinely ran out of even the most basic medicines. But underneath all that hardship was a deeper wound. The country's security, like much of Africa's, was never truly its own. Its soldiers trained with doctrines written in Paris. Its vehicles arrived on ships from Europe. Its intelligence systems relied on foreign software. Even the spare parts for its rifles were often ordered through middlemen in Brussels or Washington. When extremists attacked northern villages, Burkina Faso couldn't always respond without first getting a nod, explicit or implied, from overseas partners. This was the status quo that lined the pockets of global defense contractors and maintained the psychological architecture of dependence. And it's precisely what Captain Ibrahim Traore, the unlikely 36-year-old soldier who took power in 2022, decided to challenge head-on. It began with whispers. Reports trickled in about makeshift workshops cropping up around Ouagadougou, the capital. Young mechanics who once repaired battered taxis were now welding armored plates onto pickups. Students fresh from university engineering programs were spotted running stress tests on homemade drones, sometimes out on abandoned football fields. Local chemists, some trained abroad but disillusioned by the lack of opportunity, began experimenting with propellant mixtures and basic ballistics. Most international observers laughed it off. What could Burkina Faso possibly manufacture that would trouble the world's great powers? But then the photos emerged. Traore himself standing beside rugged, locally built troop carriers, his hand resting on sun-hot metal that had been mined, forged, and assembled on Burkinabe soil. Behind him, a new generation of soldiers, many not even 25, posed proudly in front of the vehicles, not imported, not donated, built right there by their own hands. For the West, this was a problem that ran much deeper than a few armored trucks, because every rivet tightened in Ouagadougou was a nail in the coffin of a system that had kept Africa pliant for generations. If Burkina Faso could learn to equip itself, if it could build drones without Israeli kits, manufacture ammunition without NATO contracts, train officers without French academies, what would stop Mali, Niger, or Chad from doing the same? What would happen to the billions in defense deals, the lucrative maintenance contracts, the quiet political leverage that came with controlling Africa's arsenals? Burkina Faso's neighbors were already watching closely. After years of terrorist attacks that had left markets burned and families driven from their ancestral lands, the idea of relying on local production had visceral appeal. Why beg for helicopters from Europe that might never arrive when you could assemble your own UAVs, designed specifically for your harsh terrain, serviced by local engineers who didn't vanish at the first rumor of conflict? Inside Burkina Faso, the program also sparked something even more potent than weapons: pride. For too long, many Burkinabe had been made to feel like clients of the global order, humble recipients of charity, grateful students of Western experts. Now, in bustling workshops and crowded university labs, they were carving a new identity, a nation of builders, problem solvers, defenders of their own soil. Take 24-year-old Adama Sawadogo. Before Traore's government redirected funds into local tech incubators, he was patching broken radios in his uncle's market stall. Today, he's part of a small team developing software that guides Burkina Faso's homemade reconnaissance drones. When he talks about his work, his eyes shine.
We are not just copying, he insists. We are learning, adapting, making it ours.
But this quiet revolution has also painted a giant target on Burkina Faso's back. Foreign diplomats who once moved through the presidential palace with an easy sense of ownership now file urgent cables home warning of a country slipping out of traditional orbit. Intelligence agencies have begun stepping up recruitment of local informants, hoping to map every factory, every tech lab, every warehouse that might be storing critical components. Meanwhile, economic pressure is mounting. International banks, often under discreet nudges from Western governments, are making it harder for Burkina Faso to secure credit. Infrastructure projects are suddenly delayed. Contracts long considered routine are cancelled on technicalities. The message is clear: stray too far from the established order, and your people will pay the price. Yet Traore seems undeterred. In fiery speeches broadcast nationwide, he frames the struggle not as anti-Western, but pro-Burkina Faso. "We have gold beneath our feet and courage in our hearts," he told a crowd in Bobo Dioulasso, their cheers echoing off the colonial-era buildings. "Why should our mothers sleep in fear waiting for foreign soldiers? Why should our fathers beg for second-hand rifles when we can build our own?" It's a message that resonates deeply across a population long accustomed to external interference. And it's not lost on Burkina Faso's rural communities either. In villages once terrorized by roaming gunmen, farmers now watch local patrols drive by in vehicles that were built just down the road. It may not be a perfect solution. Some of the new equipment still fails in the field, and there are tragic setbacks. But each success story chips away at the old narrative of helplessness. All of this is what makes Burkina Faso's homegrown weapons program far more dangerous to the global order than any arsenal of cruise missiles. Because it plants the seed of an idea that could sweep across an entire continent, that Africa doesn't have to ask permission to defend itself. If you trace the hidden arteries of the modern world, you'll find that global power doesn't just flow through armies or fighter jets. It flows through contracts, supply chains, and the subtle economics of dependency. That's what Burkina Faso is now threatening to upend. And the ripple effects are starting to travel far beyond its borders. Under Captain Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso is not just building armored vehicles and assembling drones in quiet workshops. It's rewriting the very contracts that once chained it to distant boardrooms in Paris and Washington. And nowhere is this more evident than in the flurry of new, often secretive trade agreements the country is forging, not only with traditional African neighbors, but with nations that the West would rather keep out of its backyard. It started quietly. After Western banks began tightening their terms, sometimes outright refusing to fund Burkina Faso's broader infrastructure needs, Traore's administration pivoted. Officials embarked on a discreet diplomatic blitz, visiting capitals that had no colonial baggage in West Africa, no historical stake in its continued subservience. In recent months, plain manifests reveal unpublicized visits to Ankara, Tehran, and even distant Jakarta, each stop designed to secure alternative financing and technical know-how. At first glance, these might look like desperate moves by an isolated government, but scratch the surface and it becomes clear these are carefully calibrated partnerships. Turkey, itself an emerging military technology hub, has quietly begun supplying guidance on lightweight armored vehicle platforms, designs that Burkina Faso's engineers can adapt and produce with local materials. Iran, long a master at building resilient industries under sanctions, has reportedly offered consulting teams to help Burkina Faso develop its own propellant and ammunition lines. Indonesia, with its thriving small arms manufacturing sector, has hinted at joint ventures that could one day serve broader West African markets. None of these deals are public in full. They're stitched together by letters of intent, private memoranda, and personal relationships cultivated over tense night meetings in secure guest houses. And that secrecy is exactly what alarms European and American diplomats.
Burkina Faso has reached that moment, and rather than whisper apologies to foreign partners, Captain Traore chose to roar a new declaration. Never again. He didn't make empty speeches. He acted. While others talked about sovereignty, he built it with his hands, his team, and his unwavering belief in Burkinabe capacity. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso has taken a revolutionary step that once seemed impossible. the local production of high-grade, modern military equipment worth billions of dollars. This isn't exaggeration. Tanks, armored carriers, combat drones, surveillance systems, cutting-edge tools of modern warfare are now being proudly designed, built, and tested on Burkina Faso soil. No second-hand donations, no outdated leftovers, no fine print from foreign powers.
As the sun sets over Ouagadougou, painting the low rooftops in molten orange, the streets come alive with a different kind of energy. Vendors pack up stalls, children chase each other through dusty lanes, and in small workshops tucked behind modest shopfronts, sparks fly from acetylene torches long into the night. These are not scenes of a country cowering under poverty or waiting meekly for foreign aid. They are the heartbeat of a people painstakingly stitching together a new idea of who they can be. One hammer blow, one solder joint, one line of code at a time. Because beyond the strategic maneuvering, beyond the secret trade pacts and quiet military tours, something profound is happening inside Burkina Faso. The country's push to build its own weapons, to shape its own security apparatus, is feeding a hunger that's far older than Captain Traore's government, older even than the French colonial administrators who once ruled from shaded verandas here. It is the hunger for dignity. Talk to older men in rural provinces like Yatenga who still remember their fathers toiling under colonial taxes, forced to grow cotton they didn't own. Talk to mothers in Kaya who once kept their children indoors for weeks because roaming militants terrorized local markets. They will tell you this isn't just about tanks or drones. It's about never again bowing to outsiders who pretend to be benefactors while holding a ledger in one hand and an insurance contract in the other. This is why the Homegrown weapons program, risky, improvised, sometimes outright clumsy, carries such weight. Every armored truck rolling off a Burkinabe line is a small act of psychological liberation. Every local software engineer who finds a clever patch to run drone telemetry without Western licenses chips away at decades of enforced inferiority. And this shift in self-perception is infectious. In Mali, billboards once dominated by foreign telecom ads now display messages about regional solidarity, with slogans like "Africa defends Africa." In Niger's university cafes, students share articles about Burkina Faso's self-made vehicle plants as if passing around forbidden samizdat. Even in Nigeria and Ghana, typically more cautious and tied to older Western frameworks, youth act in the grand halls of think tanks from London to Washington. Planners are scribbling risk charts, sketching out new containment strategies. They whisper in careful euphemisms, safeguarding regional stability, preventing arms proliferation, ensuring responsible partnerships. But strip away the polite language, and the truth is far more raw. They fear that what's unfolding in Burkina Faso could become the single biggest rupture in Africa's relationship with the global order since the day colonial flags were lowered. Because what began as a desperate move by a small West African country under siege, cobbling together homemade armored trucks, coding rudimentary drone software, striking unlikely pacts with faraway powers, is now threatening to become a contagion of ambition. Across the continent, Burkina Faso's defiance is being watched with a mix of envy and apprehension. In crowded internet cafes in Kinshasa, young Congolese students pull up YouTube clips of Burkinabe soldiers parading in vehicles welded from local steel. In the bustling streets of Nairobi's Eastleigh, traders pass phones around replaying voice notes in Swahili about how, if Burkina can do it, why not us? In Lagos, Lagosians debate heatedly over pepper soup. Some mocking Burkina Faso as reckless, others seeing it as a glimpse of what Nigeria, with far more resources, could achieve if it truly broke free from Western security pipelines. It's a psychological wildfire, and Western strategists know it. Because once the idea takes hold that true sovereignty means controlling your own defense, your own technological destiny, it becomes painfully hard to stamp out. It plants uncomfortable questions in the minds of millions who've long been told their place in the global economy, to supply raw materials, to buy finished products, and to outsource the very tools needed to protect their homes. So now, from Paris to Brussels to DC, there's a scramble to recalibrate. Old embassies that once ran on cocktail hours and discreet colonial nostalgia are hurriedly dispatching regional engagement teams to other West African capitals, promising new aid packages and military partnerships, anything to keep other governments from drifting into Ouagadougou's orbit. Western development banks, once slow to approve infrastructure loans, are suddenly discovering fresh urgency when Mali or Niger comes calling, so long as they promise to steer clear of Burkina Faso's daring model. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, less savory tactics are ramping up. A leaked cable from a European Foreign Office candidly discussed soft disruption tactics, pressuring local elites, quietly funding NGOs to run scare campaigns, even influencing local radio stations to warn of Burkina Faso becoming a pawn of Russia or Iran. It's an irony lost on no one in Ouagadougou, where people still remember that their dependence on France or the US was never framed as being anyone's pawn. It was simply called partnership. Yet for all the external schemes, Burkina Faso's biggest tests may come from within. The country's economy is still fragile. As foreign investors pull out or demand punishing terms, inflation has nipped at household budgets. Some young families complain they can't always find staple goods, that prices swing wildly from week to week. Even in the industrial corridors where new defense workshops buzz with activity, raw material shortages occasionally grind production to a halt. And then there's the ever-present security threat. Burkina Faso's north remains haunted by extremist factions, some no doubt gleeful at the prospect of sabotaging a fragile national renaissance. One spectacular attack that destroyed a convoy of locally armored vehicles last month briefly threatened morale, until a determined speech by Captain Traore reignited popular support. "Failures are scars that teach us," he said, standing amid twisted metal. "We will build again, and better." It's this stubborn resilience that seems to echo far beyond Burkina Faso. In Bamako, a youth coalition is petitioning Mali's transitional leaders to invest in joint drone development with Ouagadougou. In Freetown, Sierra Leonean commentators on late-night radio are discussing the first serious proposal in decades to establish a domestic defense research institute, explicitly citing Burkina Faso as inspiration. Even in South Africa, usually confident in its established defense sector, young activists are asking why so much of the continent's critical tech still comes stamped with European patents. The fear in Western capitals isn't that Burkina Faso alone will become a military heavyweight. On its own, it's far too small for that. The fear is that Burkina Faso might prove a concept that others rush to replicate, a decentralized, proudly local, sometimes messy but ultimately self-owned path to security and economic dignity. Because once multiple African nations begin collaborating outside traditional Western structures, pooling funds for research, building factories across borders, sharing engineers and students the way Europe shares Erasmus scholars, the entire architecture of global arms sales and security aid diplomacy collapses. The tens of billions once funneled into Western coffers every year to keep Africa safe would instead circulate from Dakar to Addis Ababa, funding local jobs, local expertise, local pride. But this possibility is also fraught with danger. A patchwork of young defense industries across fragile states could just as easily become a nightmare, fueling local arms races, arming unaccountable militias, or sparking conflicts if governments grow paranoid of newly armed neighbors. The global system that kept Africa dependent also kept a kind of brittle peace, precisely because everyone needed the same external suppliers. So now, Burkina Faso stands as both a beacon and a warning. It could mark the dawn of an Africa finally defining sovereignty on its own uncompromising terms. Or it could become the tragic example foreign powers point to for decades, saying, "See what happens when you try to go it alone?" Back in Ouagadougou's working-class districts, where generators drone late into the night and young men balance welding masks on sweaty foreheads, that philosophical debate feels far away. For them, this is simpler. They remember days when trucks of foreign soldiers rolled through their streets, meant to protect them, yet somehow always stopping short of the true front lines. They remember waiting for promised helicopters that never came while funerals multiplied. So today, they work with what they have. They teach each other skills. They swap ideas with curious visitors from Niger and Guinea. They hammer steel and test circuits and build small, imperfect things that are nonetheless theirs. And maybe that's the real revolution the world should brace for. Not a sudden military juggernaut rolling out of Burkina Faso, but millions of ordinary Africans realizing that even with limited means, they can take back pieces of their destiny. Workshop by workshop, classroom by classroom, village by village. So where do you stand? Is Burkina Faso charting a reckless path that could plunge West Africa into new dangers? Or is it lighting a fuse that might finally burn away centuries of enforced helplessness? Drop your thoughts below. Like this video if you believe these are the stories too often buried by global headlines, and subscribe so we can keep following this extraordinary, unpredictable journey together.